They weren't expecting this, so I'm putting them on the spot. Yeah, that's right here, wherever. That sounds great. Yeah, and then Sarah Taylor too. Okay, so these are engagement facilitators. So we have Brandy, Vida, Courtney. Let's see, we have Felicia. We also have Motu, who's going to be here tomorrow. And then we also have Sarah Taylor, who's Build Exito's operation coordinator. So if you have questions about the housing, if you're here from NMC or University of Guam, UA, Sarah arranged all of that, and then everything with catering as well. So if you have questions of that and parking, things like that, we can go see Sarah. So in terms of our engagement facilitators, they're Exito alumni. And I believe many of them are already PSU alumni and heading off to grad school, so in PhD programs, master's programs. So please engage with them. They're going to engage with you if you have questions for them about their experiences in our program. I know they'd love to share their own experiences. So, all right, so can I have Dr. Jen Lindwall come up? So Dr. Jen Lindwall will be hosting our conversation today.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all. It's great to be in a room with humans and see some of my colleagues for the first time since March of 2020, which is amazing. So I'm Jen Lindwall, as Carlos said. I have worked with the Build Exito program for the last 7 years, during which time I also completed my PhD at Portland State in developmental psychology. So I've been here a lot. And it's really great to be able to moderate this panel today. I know you spent the morning kind of doing some get to know you stuff, getting a preview of the programs that you're going to learn more about this week. And now we are going to hear from 6 real life researchers who are at different stages and phases of their careers, who are on different paths. And this is your chance to ask questions about what it's actually like to be a researcher, what the day-to-day is like, what the year-to-year is like. And so we've got a couple people on this panel who were in a research training program, as you are learning about this week. They were in Build Exito. And we have some other people who have served as mentors for our students, past and present. So I want to invite the folks who are on the panel up here. You're all here, right? Does everyone know who they are? Yes, awesome. Thank you, thank you. And you all can just take a seat, and we'll get started with introductions in a minute. Hi. Awesome. All right. Go ahead, thank you. All right, maybe we can start with a round of applause to thank them all for being here. Awesome. So how this is going to work, we have just under 90 minutes. We have a pretty good chunk of time to hear from these folks. We're going to start off with some brief introductions, and I have a couple questions I'm going to ask the folks on the panel to answer, and then it's going to be your turn. So we're going to have microphones around the room for you to come and ask questions of these folks, and also note cards if you're not feeling like you want to speak in front of this entire room today. You can write your question down, and somebody will collect it from your table. And really, think of any curiosities you have about what it's like to be a researcher. It could be really specific. It could be really broad. And the folks up here represent, like I said, a lot of different pathways. And so there's likely someone up here who can relate to your question, to your experience, and can give you hopefully an honest and authentic answer from their perspective. So start thinking right now of your questions, and we'll get going with introductions. So we're going to have everybody do 2 to 3 minute introduction and just talk about what their job is and briefly how they got from, where you are to where they are. So, you want to get started?
Shoot. I had to sit at the very end. I'm Bori Kia. I'm a physician at OHSU. I do research, and then I also work clinically. I'm from Salem, Oregon, so just down the road from here. I went to high school, I grew up there essentially. And then I went to Oregon State, started doing some research there. Initially did research dissecting fish, the chromatophores, which are the little shiny parts on the fish, can detect toxins, which is pretty interesting. And then it kind of kept migrating. I went to NIH and did a little more research on genetic mutations, and then I ended up going to medical school. And in medical school, I did all different types of research, anywhere from looking at mice and how, gotta stop pounding on that table, pulmonary atresia, looked at embryos in vitro fertilization, then went on to do research on genetic mutations in patients who have dermatomyositis, and then somehow ended up in emergency medicine. And I think it's because of all the variety of research that I like to do that I ended up in emergency medicine. Let's see. And now I work with Keeley, and I do still a variety of research. I studied a lot of different aspects during COVID, looking at therapeutic interventions, diagnostics, and now I'm looking at more atrial fibrillation and arrhythmias and shared decision making.
Let me just go. All right. Hi, my name is Keeley. I am a clinical research coordinator up at Oregon Health Science and University. How I got to where I'm at now, I'm a non-traditional path. I went back to school at 33 years old as a single mom with no college credits, and I decided I was going to pursue physician assisting. That pathway, I started at Clark College out in Vancouver, and I was approached by one of my professors about a program called Build Exito. And I distinctly remember saying to him, I'm not interested in research. I want to be a physician's assistant. Well, 6 years later, I am still in research, and PA is still in the foresight, but I'm very much enjoying what I'm doing. So I started off in trauma research. I was placed in the trauma research lab up at OHSU in my junior year here at PSU. I did a traumatic brain injury study and another study about a medication and hemorrhagic shock out in the field. I also supervised 15 coordinators and 8 to 10 interns, depending on the year that we had interns. And it was great. It was a wonderful foundation, but I found myself wanting to look in some different directions. And so 6 months ago, I moved over to emergency medicine and started working with this group. We worked hand in hand with them with our traumatic injury studies anyways, and so it was a pretty natural move. And now I am focused on out-of-hospital cardiac arrest with adults and pediatrics.
Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Bowles. I'm an assistant professor at OHSU within the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences. My research spans both the field and laboratory. I study circadian rhythms, so the 24-hour rhythms in your body and how they relate to cardiovascular health. So my field work, I look at shift workers and how disruption of those signals impact health. And in the lab, we bring in people, we alter their sleep-wake cycles to understand or to measure circadian rhythms in a controlled setting. Because I work with more vulnerable populations, I use a lot of community-based participatory research, so ways to engage people. They're interested in participating, whether it's in the field, but also getting people and more hard-to-reach populations to come up to the Hill, especially since OHSU is a little bit out of the way. In terms of how I got here, I started getting research experience in high school. I did some chemistry camps and then continued on through undergraduate. Every summer I was in a lab. And where I am now is really a representation of all of those little bits of experience that I had. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail. I hope some of the questions will get there because I could talk for hours about all those experiences and what they mean to me.
Thanks. My name is Ken. I'm a professor of biology here at Portland State. Woohoo! We do research on viruses, but not the kinds of viruses that make you sick or the reasons that we're wearing these masks. We work on viruses that infect microbes in volcanic hot springs. We like to call these, boiling acid viruses, and they don't look like viruses that anybody's ever seen before. So that's one aspect of what we do. We also discover new viruses. you may have seen some posters around campus of me without a mask called the Virus Hunter. So we go and find new viruses in different places. And then completely at random, about 8 years ago, I started a small company, very small, we have 1 employee, to make vaccines better. And in fact, hopefully, so we can get rid of some of these masks. How did I get here? How long do we have? So I actually started doing research in high school in chemistry, and then did some research as an undergraduate. My undergraduate degree is in chemical engineering, of all things. I use about this much of this when I'm now here as a professor of biology. Then I was fed up with school after 4 years, and then I went and worked for 3 years in Switzerland at a massive pharmaceutical company, now called Novartis. It was called Sandoz at the time. And then after a while was clearly hitting a glass ceiling. I said, I need to go back to school. So I did, got my PhD, and it was at that point I realized that there's these weird organisms that grow in weird places. They're really kind of fun. I want to work on this. And so I did, went to actually one of the few labs in the world that was working on these extreme environments. And then, long story short, it's been a little while in Yellowstone before all of it got flooded, and then moved into my house on 9/11.
Goodness. Hi, my name is Amy Donaldson, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm an associate professor here at Portland State University in the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences. And I kind of took a circuitous route. I was an international business major with French and Spanish minors in undergraduate, and then pursued my master's degree in speech-language pathology at Gallaudet University, which, if you're familiar, is the only deaf liberal arts university in the world. And so I'm fluent in American Sign Language, and my children are CODAs, which is a child of a deaf adult. And then I went and practiced clinically for a number of years, but my area is not deafness, and then pursued my doctorate and was really interested in investigating questions around social relationships and how we communicate in relationships and how we understand interactions. And I do that primarily partnering with the autistic community. I use participatory research, so my research partners are autistic folks who, share the priorities of their community rather than non-autistic folks identifying priorities of non-autistics. And so we're currently interested in how we communicate, how we identify communicative choice, agency, self-determination for autistic neurodivergent folks and promote anti-ableism. And I'm a traditional professor, so I teach research methods, I teach evidence-based practice in my content areas, and I'm really very excited whenever I get a chance to kind of introduce research to students and other folks. So I'm pleased to be here with you all today.
Yes. Hi all, my name is Tila Alvord, she, her. I recently graduated with my master's in public health from OHSU PSU School of Public Health. But just a couple years ago, I was right in your very seat as a Build Exito Scholar, so I'm pretty honored to be a part of this. I also had a non-traditional route. When I was in high school, I was certain I was going to be a fashion designer. And then I went to culinary school because clearly that's a direct path. And then I worked for Starbucks for 12 and a half years. And I finally decided to go back, started at Portland Community College, and then transferred to Portland State as an Exito undergrad. And I knew that food and nutrition was a big interest for me, but wasn't sure which route I wanted to go. And I was introduced to Exito through like a chemistry undergrad teacher, and it sounded interesting and weird, and I was into it. So started the undergrad research, was placed with Dr. Lisa Marriott, who is a part of Build Exito as well, and I've been working with her for about 5 years now, so I'm a part-time employee with her now. And we work in biomedical workforce development, so specifically, getting folks who are not traditionally represented in science and research and finding the path for them and letting them know that, they can do it. And the other work that I do is I do evaluation work for programs that are focused on food access. So it's a very different type of research, but that's kind of where my passion is. And I have a big interest in doing evaluation work because not only is it useful for just making sure that programs are actually doing what they're supposed to do, but I have a big interest in quality improvement as well.
Thank you all very much. So you also can feel free to ask a specific question to a panelist. But I want to get right into it because you all are here. And I'm sitting over here and I'm thinking, I'm intimidated by these people. Like, these people are smart, right? And this is amazing. And how do you go from, kind of just sitting in a seat or being an undergraduate or being a high schooler in a chemistry class to having this, vast portfolio of research projects. And I'm thinking that as a person who just got a PhD and still feeling, a little bit like an imposter, right? So my question for you all to start us off is, can you speak to a moment where you felt like, I don't think I belong in this world, in this field, in this room, and how did you move through that, or what kind of practice did you sort of maybe do time and time again to keep yourself in the game and to be where you are now? And I won't call on anybody to do that, but if anybody has something to jump in with, we'd love to hear it.
I think imposter syndrome was a huge thing for me. In fact, I still fight with imposter syndrome. I remember specifically walking into a conference library, kind of like what you'd think of as a boardroom. It had a long table. It had 14 chairs around it, and it was filled with all trauma surgeons. And people that had been doing this for years and years. And I remember sitting on the perimeter of that room and just kind of sinking into my chair going, please don't talk to me. Please don't say anything. I am just really scared to say something wrong or sound stupid. And that was in the very beginning as I was first coming in. I didn't have experience at all. So I think for me personally, just sticking with it, even in those moments that you feel super overwhelmed or very intimidated, you just got to push through that. And luckily, when you're involved with amazing mentors and scholar programs like this, they give you tools to work through things like that you can be successful. So if any of you experience that, don't let that keep you from your goals and your dreams, because there are ways to work through it for sure.
I'll jump in real quick, because I think I mentioned I was a chemical engineer as an undergraduate. I had one biology course as an undergrad, and I'm a professor of biology. I was told that I was going to teach virology. I'd never had a virology course in my life. And so I get there, and there are 60 students looking at me as if I know something. And I didn't. But as we heard, persistence is really important here. And I think persistence is absolutely critical. And the other part, particularly as a scientist, is a little bit of stubbornness. And I think that's absolutely critical as a researcher, is to not take no for an answer. Don't take you can't do it for an answer. You just got to keep doing it. And I think it's incredibly important to have that kind of persistence, to just keep doing things. And now, as some of you local may have seen, I've been on TV 100 times in the pandemic talking about viruses, even though, again, I had one biology course in undergrad.
My first job was berry picking, and I did that for a really long time. And then my second job was working at the state fair and handing out food when people ordered it. And then sometimes I would get lucky and work at the coffee side because they would give you tips. But I didn't know that because my coworker was taking all the tips. So you learn things, and you realize later as you go through these odd jobs here and there that each one builds you into something more. It gives you experience. It teaches you that your colleagues or your coworkers at that time aren't always honest, but you figure out a way around that, and you can still trust other people who will help build you up. And I think for me, there's always, I feel like, I don't know, all of our amazing faculty, and then when I go to a conference, there are many, many moments where I feel that imposter syndrome. And I have grant funding, and I still feel it. And other people will say, how can you feel that when you already have grant funding? You made that big achievement that everybody's looking for. But it doesn't really go away, because I think at some moment you're just striving to do better. You want to impress your family, especially if you came from a family of low means. And I'm here nervous talking in front of all of you, because there's so many of you, and you all are gonna do amazing things. And you're gonna look back at this and say, what a great opportunity that was, because each opportunity builds on another opportunity. And that started from even just working the berry fields. I could write about that into my scholarship applications, into college applications, into med school applications, even if they don't seem like much. You all have something to add to this society and to this community. So you're never too small to do anything.
I just wanted to add to that. I think sometimes, certainly imposter syndrome is absolutely real, and I think you continue to experience it along your path and your career. But there's also a different kind of intimidation that I think you can experience that can be, pushback around lines of, in your profession or in your discipline, folks may want to see a certain kind of work or a certain kind of research or a certain kind of line of work, and you may feel intimidated around that. I know, in my discipline, there is still a lot of ableism, and so when you work in a way that's anti-ableist, then it can be challenging, and it can take a long time, and publications can be very slow, and work can be very slow, and you can feel a lot of intimidation in that way. And so I think that you can also feel like that's a really steep hill to climb, and I would just really encourage you, just as was just said, you have a voice and you have a place, and the progress may be slow, but if you continue and what you feel is your direction and your path, then you will find that success, and you will find that place, and it's really rewarding. So
I'll just add, and I think I kind of touched upon points already made, but the first thought in my head was, what was a point before? I'm like, I still have it. I'm like, even being up here, I'm like, yeah, why? But the point that I wanted to add there to that is, I think I struggle with just wanting to be perfect, and that's often what keeps me back, because I think to get a paper published, to do everything, it has to be perfect when I go to submit it. My turning point was when I started getting on the other side, and I would review what people thought was acceptable, and I realized that I am very knowledgeable. I am, can set the stage for my field, because what they're submitting is, I wouldn't even think about that, but others, it can move forward, it can be acceptable, and so I realized that I'm not gonna move forward unless I put myself out there, and then, and unless I allow myself to get feedback from others, and that also helps you to get forward, move forward, and not just be afraid all the time of not being perfect. So I think that's where I started to move beyond the imposter syndrome. Yeah.
Thank you all. Great advice for all of us, I think. So in a minute, we're going to have mics coming around, and we'll get some there's note cards on your table, so feel free to be writing down your question. As we do that, I'm just going to kind of transition us with a question that really is the purpose of this panel, which is, kind of a day in the life of a researcher. So I would love if a couple of you, or all of you, if you want to, gave, without too much detail, just an overview of a typical, semi-typical day in your job. What do you do? How do you spend your time? So does anybody want to kick that off, and then we'll get to the questions from the group.
I will kick it off by saying there's no such thing as a typical day as a researcher.
That's a great
Well, yours is
answer.
TV. Yours is being on TV, I think. Anybody want to take a shot at a day? Okay.
Jump in. My most recent work has been, as I mentioned, in evaluation work. So it's program evaluation, and it's a program that links folks who are accessing healthcare at federally qualified health clinics. So most of them are going to be very low income. And we're linking them with local farms. So we actually have CSA shares, which are community supported agriculture. And the intention is to improve diet, so hopefully improve health. And evaluation work is something that I wasn't aware of before, but it's incredibly important because it, lets us know if we're doing things correctly. There's several different types of evaluation, but what we're doing is surveying people. So participants in the program, we are doing pre and post, and we are literally just calling people or talking to them in person, and we have a set of validated or tested questions that we ask pre and post, and then we compare those. So a day in the life is lots of phone calls, lots of explaining who I am, reading the same question over and over and over. But it's also, very, very human work. It's very personal work. People divulge a lot of really, really personal and hard details about themselves and their lives. And that's kind of the social science aspect for me is humans are messy, but they're amazing. And then after that, it's, debriefing what went well, what didn't go well, a lot of data management, a lot of data cleaning, and then you get to do the exciting part of presenting all of that. But, day to day, I feel like you kind of figure a lot of it out as you go, which is, I think, one of the surprising things that people think that scientists know all the things and all the answers, and boy, howdy do we not. I'm sorry, am I giving away our secrets? And then some of the other work that I do is very similar. We do a lot of surveys, but we also do focus groups and interviews, which can be really, really interesting. Again, you get into the kind of the messy human details, which I love. So that's what my day looks like.
I would say I'm unique as a researcher in that I'm able to spend all my time doing research, and I'll get into what that means in a minute. But a lot of researchers have teaching responsibilities or clinical responsibilities. I'm in an institute that doesn't have a graduate school population, or not a direct one, and we definitely don't have undergrads. And because we're in the Institute of Occupational Health Sciences, 50% of our funds come from the state, and so I'm just really fortunate to be able to do what I wanted to do, or when I went to school was to do research. But that said, I got into science because I liked math and science and not necessarily writing. And most of my day is writing, either writing for grants or writing papers to explain the outcomes of my studies. That is the majority of my day, and I never thought that was going to be the case. So definitely take some good writing classes because you will be doing a lot of that. And then I do spend a lot of time also analyzing data. That's the part that's most fun because it is doing some of the math and the reasons why I like science. And I get to keep learning more because there's many more stats classes than I do a lot more stats than I ever took courses for, so I ended up teaching myself a lot of that stuff. And then a lot of it's also just management. I have 3 large projects, so I have different staff that help with those projects, and so I have to coordinate them and make sure they're getting tasks done and making sure they're keeping data organized. And then a very small percentage of my time is actually collecting the data. So for my field studies, I very rarely go out. I'm more of the figurehead, so I make sure I have good community relations, but I'm not the one conducting the focus groups at this point. For my in-lab studies, they're run 24/7 when we have them, so that does take a lot of staff, so sometimes I'll help with that and actually collect data. So we're working with humans, so it's collecting saliva, blood pressure, running cognitive tests, giving surveys, et cetera. But that's very, very little bit of the actual what I do on day to day. And then disseminating the data. So for me, again, because I do community-based research, sometimes that does mean going out to the community to give talks or doing some tabling events, but a lot of time it means going to conferences. And so that's nice because I get to travel and I get to meet other scientists, and we get to sometimes establish collaborations and think about how we could work together. Yeah, that's a fun part of the job.
So I think my position is a little bit unique as well. I work at 2 different hospitals. So I work at Adventist and I work at OHSU. So my day kind of depends on which one of my studies is enrolling. With my out-of-hospital cardiac arrest study, this is an enroller that goes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have a call team that's on call that responds at all hours. So if I get called in and we enroll, then I will spend a lot of the next couple of days focusing on my data and getting the stuff that I need and making sure that the patient is on protocol. If I don't have an active enrollment, then I'm at the office and, either starting up new projects, or I am wrapping up old projects, verifying data, answering queries and things of that nature, and kind of managing those projects. So it really just kind of depends on what comes my way, on what my day is. And I am in the field collecting data. So I go and I consent to patients. I actually speak with the families that are going through these times. And so I'll sit down and get to know them. And that's kind of one of my things that I like about my job, is that I do get that patient interaction still, even though I'm working in research. So that's kind of how my day goes.
I'm going to jump in real quickly. As well as writing, I find I end up doing nowhere near as much time reading as I should. And that's another sort of imposter syndrome thing. There's way too much literature to be able to read or even try and keep up with. But definitely reading is an extremely important part of what we do.
All right, well, we've got many questions on note cards here. Dr. Stedman, I'll start out with one that's directed to you. How do you feel confident on TV talking about viruses, despite not having taken a course that you now teach? Would you want to respond to that?
So the answer is I don't actually feel terribly confident. The first time, I'll tell you a little story about the first time that I was asked to be on TV. This was the beginning of 2020. I got a phone call. I almost never pick up my phone in my office. So my students know this. They send me emails, much better way to reach me. So I pick up the phone, and the other end said, "Hi, this is Turkish television. Can you be on live TV in 20 minutes?" It's like, okay. And I'd been following a little bit of the news, and then frantically Google a number of things and sort of see what's going on. Wuhan, where the heck is Wuhan? So then the Skype screen comes up, and I start chatting with them. And then about 5 minutes later, the internet goes down. So I'm partway through the interview, and then all of a sudden, everything's gone. It was all of SRTC. The internet just died. So I thought, okay, no one's ever going to ask me again about this stuff. But I guess they did, and I keep getting asked about it. And basically, it's a lot about reading, writing, frantically trying to keep up with what's going on. But there's also an aspect of, I'm being asked, and it's kind of my responsibility to know some of these things and be able to try and communicate back. I make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. There's also the aspect of TV, is you can have a 20-minute interview. It ends up being maybe 30 seconds if you're lucky. So you also need to be very careful about what you say, which I've also learned in the process. I actually got some nasty emails about one thing that I said but got cut off incorrectly. But again, it's getting back to practice. I think I feel much more confident about it now than I did that time when they said, can you be on live TV in 20 minutes?
I think that highlights the level to which everybody is everybody's just kind of faking it till we make it, learning it while we do it. I mean, that's really what's happening here and with all of you all. So there's a lot of really great questions here. And I don't know that we'll be able to cover them all, but I wanted to start with this one, and maybe we'll just have a couple people answer it. Did you have trouble figuring out what type of research you wanted to do? And if so, how were you able to get past that and come to realization, like, this is the thing I want to research out of all the things I could research? Anyone want to take that on?
I think it's an evolution. You know, my mentor, I've had lots of great mentors. I would say my primary mentor always said, "So what's your question?" And I think about that all the time, and I tell that to all my students, "So what's your question?" And I think curiosity is always what drives research, and your question doesn't stay the same. So it's an evolution, and I've evolved continually throughout my career, and I would assume you all would as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that one of the reasons that I was drawn to public health research in particular is because it's not just one thing. And the fact that, you know, I'm a complex person, I have a lot of interests, and I get to do different types of projects that focus on different things. And sometimes I choose a project not necessarily based on the subject, but based on the skills that I get to learn, the things that I get to do within that. And sometimes I do it because it's more of a passion project. So.
Yeah, during my introduction, I was saying what I do now is really just is a result of all of the prior experiences I had. So as an undergraduate, I started in a lab. I worked in a diabetes lab, and so I took that on to the next lab where I was doing where we were looking at the impact of Alzheimer's and diabetes, and in particular, I was looking at, actually, so then the next lab I was in, I looked at the endocannabinoid system, so your body makes like THC-like molecules, and I still do some of that stuff now, despite that being something I did as an undergraduate. So they all kind of linked onto each other, but that was because I was interested, and then I kept reading and I asked new questions, and sometimes it's also what comes to you. So in grad school, I had worked with some shift workers in New York City who work for the transit department, and so bringing that here, I'm not working with TriMet, although I have colleagues who are, but the fire department came to me to do some work, and because I'd already done some field work with shift workers, it was somewhat aligned, not quite the same population, but I felt I had the skills to move forward because of those prior experiences. So yeah, a lot of things sometimes are luck, sometimes you're building off of prior experiences. I will say though, most formative experience for me, though, when I was an undergraduate, I was a UNCF Merck fellow, and my mentor there made sure that we had weekly lunches with people across the company, whatever they did that touched upon science. So I talked to some people in the law department, I talked to some people on the public health department, I was working in the neuroscience group, but I'd maybe talk to the microbiologist, some accountants, like everything, and really just had a good opportunity to see what I could do with that degree, because before then I would still say I had a limited scope. Like I actually ended up getting a degree in clinical epidemiology after getting my PhD because of that experience and actually seeing that, oh, I can help others in a large way, not by just doing bench research, but public health as well. Like I really wasn't familiar with what I could do in that realm before that experience. So this right here, what you're doing, is a great way to do that. Make informative interviews. I've had various Exeter and URI scholars email me just to have meetings, and we'll take 30 minutes on WebEx and just talk about my career path. Not everyone's going to do that and have the time, but try to do that. It doesn't hurt to reach out and see what other people are doing to get a flavor of what's going on. So to help you push you in that direction and figure out what you should read and look up on further.
Thank you all. Did anyone want to ask a live question in a microphone? Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Rose. I want to start by saying thank you guys so much for being here today. So my question is, whenever you're approaching research for, like, example, your thesis, and it's something that you're really passionate about, but has also already been talked about so much in the science community, how do you recommend approaching that and kind of making your own paper stand out a little bit?
I think I did this most recently. I just graduated 3 months ago, so I just finished my thesis. Food insecurity is something that you will hear a lot. Everybody's talking about it. It's a very hot subject, especially in public health, but it's also becoming a little bit more well-known. And so the work that I did for my graduate work was in food access. And because I was able to work with a program and do evaluation work, I was able to kind of see the different aspects of, what goes into these programs, what are different parts of them that I can talk about, and I was able to find a more innovative part of a program to talk about, because nobody wants to hear about food access or food insecurity. We all hear it quite a lot, but if you're talking about something innovative, so specifically, we're looking at food access, getting people connected with farm fresh produce. But one of the innovative parts of it for this program that I worked with was the payment structure. So instead of a typical CSA payment, which is a whole lot of money all up at once to the farmer, and then you go on a weekly basis and pick things up, this is all actually funded through Medicaid. And so that funding mechanism, which was worked on with a lot of the folks that I do work with at the program, and there's been a lot of work in like the Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon's Medicaid, I was actually able to find out about that and focus on that thing. So there's always going to be something interesting and innovative within a really well-known subject that you can focus on.
Anybody else want to respond to that? Okay. Well, there's a couple questions here around work, life, school, research, balance. So they boil down to how do you balance it all? And so I know some of you personally and know some of the things that you have balanced, but would anybody care to speak to balancing your life and work and school?
And kids, and I can speak on this one. Balance was tricky in the beginning, I think, because I worked the entire time I was doing my undergrad while taking care of my kids and doing my internship with Build Exito. And so I had to reserve time for me. And so I cut out a 12 to 14 hour period a week that was strictly for me to recharge. If I don't recharge, I can't be a good mom. I'm not going to get my studying done. I'm going to be tired. And so that became priority to me. And when I recognized some imbalances with my work and home life, I readjusted those and found a different position that kind of suited my needs better. And it's okay to do that, and like they were saying, you kind of evolve in your career. And so I had just recognized that it was my time to look for something that was a little bit more structured and balanced for my kids and myself. And so that's kind of how I did it through my undergrad and over the last couple of years.
I don't think there's true balance. For me, I think it's compromise. You're compromising on one of those aspects of your life, and you have to choose which one is it going to be at a certain time. When I'm writing my grant and I have a deadline, it's compromising a little bit on my family and making sure that I have a village to help take care of them. I have so many carpools for my kids. I have neighbors that help pick up packages when I'm just at the computer working all day, all night long. And then when my grant is done, I'm back to life. I help take care of my kids, help take care of the other kids, and then back to more of my clinical life as well. And my colleagues understand that, and they will trade shifts with me. So it really does take, I think, a village and a community that understands you and finding those people who will support you through your life.
Agreed.
Yeah, it definitely goes through ebbs and flows. I wasn't going to answer it first because I was like, I'm not all yet. I'm pretty bad about it. I have a 6-month-old and I have a 4-year-old. And I only took 6 weeks off because my project with the firefighters needed to get started. And I had a research coordinator, actually 2, quit in November. And I gave birth in November. So I had to get into it because they're going to change schedules in March, and that was the study. But it ebbs and flows. So that was a really bad time, but I'm going to take some weeks off next week. I'm taking some time off, and I'm taking some time off in August. So I broke it up, right? So it wasn't what I wanted it to look like, but it's going to work out and maybe even better because now she's older and I get to experience her in some different kind of way. So it's just changing your perspective of what that needs to look like. Sometimes, like for me, I prefer taking public transportation because I know I'm going to get a paper read or I'm going to write an abstract or something like that because it's a time when I have no distractions really. And so, yeah, I just carve out times. I do make sure I schedule massages or my nails so I can have just some me time. But yeah, it's not perfect balance. It has to be changed for what I need and what needs to be done at different times.
Yeah, I just want to sort of follow up on some of that. I completely agree with everything that's already been said. What I do is I combine my commute and my exercise. I bike everywhere, and that gives me some extra me time as well. The other thing is I'm slowly realizing that you could spend an infinite amount of time on all of these different things. At some point, you just have to stop. It's good enough. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And so at some point you just have to say, okay, this is as much as I can do reasonably.
Any other? Oh, no, please.
Go ahead.
I would like to hear what you have to say.
I think it's taken me a long time personally to decide about some choices. I'm an associate professor, and I could have been a full professor a couple of years ago, and you make some choices about work-life balance and how you want to move forward, and then you follow through with those choices, and I think it's really freeing sometimes to not continue at a pace that is maybe expected or decided upon, and my productivity is just fine, and all of those pieces are just fine. And I think that sometimes we just get caught up in what kind of an academic expectation is, and it's freeing to not necessarily do that. So the dog park and Pilates every day is my mandate.
I think what we hear here is it doesn't have to be work. You can still have a life. You can have interests. You can be a scientist and have children if you want to do that. You can pursue different hobbies. It's all possible. So thank you for that. Is there other in the microphone questions? Yeah. Let's see. How about over here? Okay.
So with doing online school and transfers, I'm not gonna have a full 4-year career at this transfer school that I'm going to, and I still wanna have a full career of research. So is there any good way to expedite getting into research and be able to make up for my lost time? I'm trying.
I don't believe that there is lost time. I also transferred here as a junior, so I only did junior and senior year here at PSU. And what I did was I looked for summer experiences. So I was a summer intern at the Oregon Institute of Occupational Health, and it was amazing. I highly recommend. And then I also went into Build Exito as a junior, so I did 2 full years of that. But I mean, frankly, you can take research classes and you can find these wonderful opportunities, but I mean, I think the first thing is I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but I think that seeing your experience as a deficit is not going to do you any good. I don't think that there's any lost time. I think that you can start a research career at any point. I didn't start until I was 38, and I don't feel that it was a deficit. I feel that all of my lived experience up to that has made me a better researcher.
Are you pointing right here for a question?
She's been raising her hand for a while.
Oh, please. Yeah, of course. I'm like looking beyond. You're right there.
I want to ask if what degrees are invited to research besides being in the medical field or science field.
And do you mean the type of discipline or an actual degree? Okay, so different. Yeah, and there's a couple questions here too about sort of, the humanities and different fields and how research ties in. So does anybody want to answer that?
I mean, like every discipline has research opportunities, so it really depends on what you're interested in. I'm very much STEM. I have my PhDs in neuroendocrinology, but I have they were an Exedo scholar and then got a diversity supplement, so it was continued on as I guess the term we use as for them in their application was I think they had post-bac. We were just post-bac from undergrad. And they're looking in to go to medical anthropology, so not pure, biology related, but was able to design some focus groups and it's carried on in that direction. But yeah, I know plenty of people who are sociology, psychology, English, history, whatever you're interested in, and you're looking to ask a question about and dig into further and learn the how to design I guess, research question, you can pursue it.
I've had Exedo scholars in my lab who are psychology majors, social work majors. I think I had a child and family studies major. So, and my work is inherently interdisciplinary, so I'm very excited to work with folks who bring different perspectives.
Yeah, in our RLC, we've had ex-Google engineers, ex-designers, actually fashion designers, who've joined the group, so I don't think it really matters. I think the passion and the interest is much more important than your actual degree per se. You can learn stuff. It's really hard to learn enthusiasm and passion.
Curiosity.
Although I do want to say not everybody is probably going to agree with that, because I remember when I was, even as I was looking for graduate programs, that was kind of the philosophy I came in. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll go into a biochemistry department because they're working on a question that I'm interested in, but maybe I'll change fields for my postdoc. But not every scientist is going to have that mindset. There's still a lot of people who are like, you're in this lane, this is the lane you need to stay in. So you have to be aware of as well as who your mentor is and their mentoring philosophy. And I think, part of like the Build Exedo program, they have you essentially assign a contract that talks about like your philosophy. So that definitely helps. You're in a program that's good with that, but just to be aware that not every person's gonna be as welcoming.
Yeah, and I'll just add, right, you're going to hear about many different types of research programs and opportunities tomorrow and Wednesday. And a lot of what you hear will be biomedical focused or sort of seem like it's more traditionally from STEM, majors that you're used to hearing about. But we have a lot of different students here with a lot of different interests. So the idea is to hopefully spark your interest in asking that question you have, as you sort of pursue your degree pathway. So let's see, do we have a question? Are you pointing? Okay, in the back. Yes? Awesome.
Hi. Oh, geez. My name is Anna Rose, and I had a question for Ken Stedman. Can you think of any positives you've experienced working in the field you didn't receive a formal or conventional education in, such as maybe a different perspective or having a more adaptable understanding of your field?
So, thanks for your question. I think I'm going to try and move away from my own personal experience. Again, getting back to this fashion designer who, in the process of fashion design, decided that plastic pollution was a huge problem didn't know how to move forward with that, did a postbac, and then did research in our RLC, is now doing a PhD on plastic remediation at Montana State University. So there's that sort of process. And really, I think coming at it from the fashion point of view, knowing some of the problems, knowing some of that, really get a very good perspective, I think, that certainly is not something that I would have been thinking about. So hopefully that's an example for you.
All right, I have some of the questions that were written are like, these folks could be interviewing you for your next job. Have you ever had a research project that didn't go as you planned? And if so, how did that make you feel? The answer is yes, and it made you feel terrible?
It's terrifying. So I have never designed and conducted a huge project on my own. I prefer to be a cog in the machine. It's my happy place. So I tend to help run other people's projects. And there are a lot of times where, I have spent weeks preparing, and I think that I have all of my docs ready and my folders organized, and I get there and I thought I've tested the equipment, and literally everything fails. We can't get on Wi-Fi, nobody can sign in, our interpreters don't show up, or our participants don't show up, or the data gets, jostled somehow. Things are always gonna go wrong, and it makes you feel awful, and that's okay. I think the important thing is, part of what we do is iteration, learning from our mistakes, just seeking to do better always. And so I have a tendency to debrief with my team. I learn so much from my data collectors because they're the ones in the trenches. And I try and incorporate their ideas or their lessons learned into how I function moving forward. So I just kind of go in with the understanding that something is always going to go wrong, but that's the universe's way of trying to teach you how to do better.
I would say that the data are the data, and that's really a hard pill to swallow sometimes. I spent about the first 15 years of my career doing only quantitative research, randomized control trials, and you build up to those, starting with pilots and single subject designs. But I'm a clinical researcher, and so even those, when you're doing intervention research, we're talking, 10 weeks, 12 weeks of intensive data collection. Intervention is, 12, 15 hours a week, intensive intervention, multiple participants. I mean, this is very time-intensive research, and then you see the data, and it can be very challenging. And so yeah, I've experienced that. And all you can do is take that information and learn from it. And you kind of reach the pinnacle when you get contacted by folks saying, so we noticed you didn't publish these data. It must not have worked. Can you share those data? And so, same thing when you get your reviews back. This is good advice, folks. Have a glass of wine or whatever your beverage of choice is. Wait 24 hours, and then you move forward, because you just learn from it,
And for anyone who's not familiar with this process, when you are in these positions,
Oh, sorry.
no, it's okay. You're submitting this paper that you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into and done all this work for, and then 3 people potentially just rip it apart and write back to you about all the things you did wrong. And that is the process of which you speak, and it can be challenging.
That is. Sorry, I didn't provide context, so, yeah. But it's good advice.
Yeah.
You'll use it.
One thing that I've definitely learned is to try not to take these things personally.
Yes.
It's hard, because you put your blood, sweat, and tears into these proposals, the papers, et cetera. I think I was chatting with, Tony earlier, is like, if 1 in 10 work, I feel I'm actually doing a pretty good job. And that means 9 times somebody said no, for whatever reason it is. So you have to appreciate those highs as much as you can and not dwell too much on the lows.
Any other folks who want to ask a question? Yeah, I saw your hand first.
Hello. So, with those with the PhDs, I know with like certain dissertations and stuff like that, it can be hard to start somewhere, especially if someone's already done it. Where do you like begin to like dig in deeper and to try to find where someone hasn't been before?
I think that's the keep on reading part. There are thousands of questions out there. Like I'm not usually one of a person who's like really worried about being scooped unless I'm like at the point where I'm just about to publish or something. Scoop means like someone else is taking your idea, because I have 1,000 ideas. I don't have time. I go to conferences and I'll like, someone will talk about something that I'm like, oh, I could do something or apply that to what I'm doing and extend it. And I have so many ideas written down or on pieces of paper, on my phone. I don't have enough lives to do all the things. But that only becomes, I only have all those questions because of learning from others, from reading more. So yeah, I think just keep reading and you'll have more background information to help you press the question further and find out where there are gaps to help you figure out where to go next.
Yeah, and take advantage of your mentors as well. And they can give you great advice along those lines, sometimes incorrect advice, which I have done. But I think definitely take advantage as we heard, there's no way you can read everything. But the more people you have meeting more things, the more information you can get.
And you had a question. Do you want to ask yours next? Yes, that would be great. Can you bring a mic over? Do you mind? Do you want to raise your hand up? I know I kind of pointed in that direction. Let's see. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Ashanti, and I just wanted to ask, like, when researching, has there been a time where you've given up or like pulled away on something you were doing midway because nothing has been going out the way you planned, or do you kind of push through and find motivation to just finish it even though you had those problems? And if you do push through, where do you find the motivation to do that? Or, yeah.
I'll jump in here really quick. We've definitely got to the point on some projects where we've decided not to keep working on them just because things are not working for reasons that are not obvious. But getting back to this point that we just heard, there are usually so many other things you could do. And one of the things that I found is that when you're writing a grant proposal, exceptions to this as well, but usually if you have the money, if you don't do exactly the thing that you said you were going to do, for reasons you don't know, nobody knew. The reason it's research and science, you don't know if it's going to work. And so if it doesn't work, you can pivot and do something, hopefully at least similar to it. But it's a really hard question. Is it when do you say on a particular project, no, this is it, and change? That's an extremely hard question to answer.
I think that's also hard because there are funders, right? Mm-hmm. They are depending on you not depending, they expect results of some sort, either publications, abstracts, or presentations. If you can negotiate with your funders if you feel like this is not working the way you expect, and then try to change the methodology in some way where you could still get a similar answer to the question, or maybe a slight change in the question, but usually it's still on the same topic. At a recent project that we are still trying to get published, it was a COVID topic, and that is like, nobody cares anymore. We have tried to get that paper published so many times, and we are still trying. We're not giving up because we have funders that still expect that. And we did get results from it, but it is a passé topic now because, as I said, it's like for every month during the COVID pandemic, it's like a year in real life. So it's like, okay, so that's like several years later now, nobody cares about it, but we are still trying because a lot of people put effort into that project. They collected samples. We use labs at U of O to collect samples and do testing, so we still keep trying.
So I think the question coming to my mind, and that's represented in some of these cards, is around motivation. So for those of you who pursued the terminal degree in your field, a PhD or an MD, what motivated you to do that? Or you could just talk about what has motivated you to stay on your path as a researcher.
To get it, it comes down to, and I touched upon this before, was the population I wanted to help. Like, I didn't want to be an MD or a DO because I didn't want to directly interact with people every day. And I wanted to be able to touch upon a greater audience. And so I thought doing research was the direction. And so I didn't need a whole lot of motivation to get my PhD. It was the perhaps afterwards part. And perhaps I think I was just naive at that point because I didn't know how hard it is to maybe to get an academic job and things like that. And so I was a little bit slower there. What keeps me going now, I think, is the mentoring. Like and I don't have to teach because I'm not at a institute that has that as a requirement, but I love mentoring because I see the passion in those that come through my lab that excite me to keep doing it. And so I think that's probably my everyday motivation, because it's not always those bigger questions, because it can take years to get data generated and to publish it, but others' excitement also helps. Those in my lab, I think I kind of encourage them to do the same thing, because they might have a paper that they've been working on for months and they're just not excited about it anymore, especially if it's like the 4th time I've sent them corrections or something like that. Or maybe I said, actually, I like that first version better. Can we go back to that? And so, but when we get to that point where I can tell that it's taking them a bit longer to get the next draft to me, I try to mix it up. Maybe I suggest they send it to someone else on the authorship list to get some fresh eyes on it. So to me, it's just just the interaction, the talking with people, those that are excited, reminding me why it's an important question. And then, I think that's what it is. And I also, because I do the community part, it helps as well, because I get to I'm reminded why this question is important, and the excitement there also just really helps me when I'm feeling frustrated from those reviewer responses.
In terms of me and my motivation, I think it's finding something new and that nobody else has ever seen before. And I've been incredibly fortunate to have had that happen a couple of times in my career. And still looking down the microscope and saying, hey, I'm the first person in the world who's ever seen this. That's insane. At the same time, finishing the PhD, there was that question about what was the motivation for that. It was really so I could be my own boss. And that's not necessarily for everybody, but that for me was a really big motivator. I had a really good job offer to work in the patent office on somebody else's ideas, and I turned them down, and the people in the patent office said, are you insane? And then I told them why I turned it down, and they said, actually, you probably did make the right decision. But that's definitely not for everybody. And one thing about getting into research early is you can figure that out. Is if it really isn't for you. We've had multiple people in our RLC who've decided that this really isn't their thing. And I think that's great. You've learned. It's a learning process. So it doesn't have to be extreme viruses all the time, not like that crazy Stedman guy. That's totally fine. I don't have a problem with that.
I think for me, I don't have a PhD, and as I mentioned earlier, I am more on a clinical route. I want to go and become a physician's assistant and work in surgery. So some of my previous research was in traumatic brain injury, and I'm currently working on a cardiac arrest study, and we do outcomes with these studies. So to be able to see somebody come through with a traumatic injury or an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and then follow up with them in the 90 to 6 month period, to see them survive, to see them walk away still having quality of life, and knowing that the research that we're doing is going to impact that standard of care is what drives me to still want to pursue that clinical position too, as well as my research. So I think just looking at what we're doing and how we're helping people is an amazing way to continue your motivation.
When I worked clinically for a number of years, I saw a lot of practices that weren't based in evidence, and I'm pretty keen on evidence-based practice, and so that drove me to take my doctorate, because I just wanted to add to our knowledge base. And as I said, I'm a clinical researcher, and I think what continues to motivate me is partnering with communities and doing participatory research. But I would also say kind of some of my more traditional roles as an academic. I'm an editor of a journal in our discipline, and work to organize conferences. And I think in that way I do policy change at a discipline level, which I think is really important for academics to work within their disciplines. And mentorship has been mentioned, and I think that's incredibly rewarding. And I always have questions that I want to answer, but they're driven by the community. And I have the opportunity to partner with community members in a way that's incredibly fulfilling. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I will follow that up saying that I most definitely love to learn. I will be a lifelong learner, which I think is necessary for science in general. But for me, because I work in public health and more with the public, that they are what continues to drive me, are the populations that I get to work with and serve. And it's both a humbling and an inspiring experience, because, most people are not going to see a thing for the first time, right? Like, most of us will not have that experience. That is incredibly rare. But a lot of us can have those really beautiful moments where you get to say, I actually did help someone live a better life, or I helped change that policy that is going to improve thousands or millions of people's lives. Mm-hmm. And that sort of thing in particular, when you get to do evidence-based research and you get to present those findings, and then you get to see it actually change the laws or change the policies and how things are done, that's a really empowering thing. And I know for sure that's what keeps me going, is just knowing that I helped make things a little better.
Anyone else want to ask a question? Yeah, can we get the mic up here? We've got just about 15 minutes left, so this might be our last one, and then I have a question I want to close us out with.
So this question is for anyone who wants to answer it. So I know that being in research, it's fun and fantastic while you have research to do and a goal to accomplish. But what about the times when you don't have research to do and you're submitting all those papers to try and get funding to answer that question you have? Have you guys ever been in a slump where nobody wanted to fund your research? And what did you do to get beyond it to keep the passion alive?
Well, I'm currently funded, but in a traditional academic position, you're funded. I mean, part of your job is research, and so whether I have grant funding or not, I'm constantly doing research. The expectation is I'm constantly seeking external funding, but I'm constantly doing research whether I have external funding or not.
Yeah, I think to some extent it also again depends on the position that you're in. A position at an institution like Portland State, we're paid 9 months a year to teach, but also do research. And so at that point, you can continue still to do research even if you don't have necessarily external funding. Mm-hmm. I've been incredibly fortunate that we have had external funding since I've been here, but there's definitely cases where that's not true. I don't think that was me. Maybe some of those researchers who haven't gotten external funding. But yeah, it's definitely possible. And there are also not necessarily the big NIH funding, the big NSF funding. There's small funding here and there. There's some internal funding at the university. So there are ways to keep doing things, but you're going to have to certainly change the way that research is being done. And it does fluctuate a lot. It's hard to keep track of that. And again, getting back to the management issues that we were talking about before, is I'm really worried I'm not going to be able to pay my people. if we're not getting that kind of funding. And actually, our panel is meeting tomorrow and Wednesday. Please, please, please. Hopefully we'll be able to keep paying people.
Yeah, I'm not in that position, and I'm bringing too much money, so I get to bank some of that to save. So hopefully, if I do get in that position, I have some money to carry over. Similarly, OHSU has a number of bridging opportunities for if investigators get into that spot. A lot of times, you also want to be collaborating with others, because then you're gonna be on their grants for some amount of money. So you just have to diversify yourself, just like you diversify your portfolio in other ways in life to protect, hopefully, once you start saving money. You want to do the same thing so that way you can reduce that hurt. But yeah, the hardest part is really the paying of others, because you can't really add in others to other people's grants that often. Sometimes you might share some staff, but that comes with other issues as well. Yeah, those are the strategies that people have put into place.
So as someone who works clinically as well, so I am funded externally with my own funding, and if I don't externally fund myself, then my clinical time goes up. But again, just like everyone said, a lot of that funding is to pay not just myself, but to pay the staff who help support the research, and really they are essential to doing all of the research that I do, and I definitely diversify to bank funding for myself as well.
Anyone else want to ask a question in the audience? Are you pointing to someone, or you want to ask one, Dr. Anatori? You do. Dr. Anatori is up.
Roberta is fine. Is it on? Yeah. Okay, so this will be a quick one. One word answer from each of you. What is the most important character trait you want to see in a research student? I'll start you off. Persistence.
He took half of yours. Okay.
Mine is tenacity.
I'm going to say communication.
Stubbornness.
I agree with communication.
I'm going to go with compassion.
Trying to pick something different, since that word was already said multiple times. Curiosity.
That's a good one. All right, so we have time for two more. This one I think is interesting. I'm just going to read it as is, and I hopefully I'm reading this correctly. As a minority, I'd like to know how your work is interpreted by your peers. Are there discrepancies you face? And if so, how do you manage that? We can wait. We can hang. Anybody want to take that on?
It's a heavy question. There's just so many different layers there. I think right now I'm in a very supportive place, and so I don't feel it as much. But I think the biggest gaps were probably coming up. I didn't recognize them as being gaps until I got further up, and I had wished that others had provided me certain resources that I didn't know I didn't have at the time, right? So as a grad student, I didn't know the steps that I should be taking, and I feel like I just taught myself a whole lot more. I didn't ask enough questions, but I made it. But I could have made it a lot easier if others were just holding my hand a bit more, and I think it's just because they didn't know that I didn't know. I think those were the gaps. Those are things I didn't even know that I didn't know. So as a mentor, I suppose I can help others by making sure that they know that it's okay to come to me and ask questions when they don't know what the next step is, and what grants they should go and pursue, or that they can go and ask for other mentorship opportunities, the type of things that I hope that they should be getting from me. Yeah, I don't know. I think to me sometimes the communication part's this thing that I still miss because maybe it's the imposter syndrome that I still have, and so during a faculty meeting maybe will keep a little more quiet. When I do start speaking, I can talk a lot, but so I might assume that's going to be perceived a certain way, or if I maybe have an attitude, or what could be perceived as an attitude because I'm frustrated, whereas someone else can be just as frustrated, and I don't assume that anyone's interpreting what they're saying a certain way. So yeah, some of it I don't know if it's real, and some of it's not. Other things, I think I just end up carrying a heavier burden because I want to make it easier for others coming after me. So for example, because of one of my studies as a health disparities study looking at with the population of African Americans, there was a comment made to one of my staff, or one of my research participants, that was completely inappropriate. And so I went to my chair and said, this whole department needs to have unconscious bias training. And I was a postdoc at the time, actually. So it was 5 years ago before it was like mandated that everyone was doing it. And then I became like an OHSU inclusion ambassador, and then I started a diversity and equity and inclusion committee within my institute. Like, those are things that no one else is doing. And so that was all extra burden and task and time that other young faculty weren't doing that I was doing. But I will say again, I'm in a supportive institute, and so they've paid me for that now, and other ways that they've given me credit that they hadn't initially given me, but they realize that they need to be doing that because it's time taken away that others aren't given. Yeah, so I'm sure if I keep thinking I could give lots of other examples, but it's not always so obvious. A lot of it is just very subtle ways that my journey has been different. And part of that maybe is because I'm a minority. I think a lot of it's just because I'm also first generation, so I didn't have the examples. But the longer I'm in it, the more networks I build, the easier that part has gotten.
Did anyone else want to speak to that? Okay. All right, so we're going to do a closing question, which would be great if everybody could answer. It doesn't need to be in one word. What's the best thing about being a researcher?
I'm going to say traveling to conferences. I don't know if that's the best thing, but now that COVID's not, like we're pretending it's not a thing and people are going to conferences. Yeah, it's been fun. You get to share your studies. I went to Germany with my 2-month-old, and so I got to present there, and then take a couple extra days and go to a new place. So those are actually extra perks, and again, I get to collaborate with others and speak to others from across the world.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I think that networking, for me, I'm very social, I'm very outgoing, and so I think the biggest thing coming out of Build Exito and in my research career is the networking that I've been able to accomplish, and all the people that I've been able to meet and experience their stories. It has helped me grow as a person, and I very much appreciate that.
So I'm going to be totally stereotypical and say the students, but that's really what I mean, is when I get to see the students and how they're getting excited about what they're doing, getting their paper accepted, going to the microscope, looking at something, checking out data, doing presentations. That's what gets me really excited.
For me as a physician scientist, I get to see my patients, find out the issues that are troubling our medical system or whatever medical problem that they have, and decide, is that an interesting question enough for me to take it on, or can I do it? And find people who can collaborate with me and design a study to answer those questions.
I think my favorite thing, because as I mentioned, I love learning new things and being introduced to new ideas. I love being able to work in a super diverse and collaborative group. Being introduced to new ideas and new ways of thinking or asking questions or seeing something is probably my favorite part of any team that I work on, because you know, I come from a very specific place and I think in a very specific way, but being able to be introduced to new ways of thinking and doing, it definitely makes me a better person, and it just, it makes everything more interesting, I think.
Well, going last is a detriment because those are all the things that I love. So,
yes.
Perfect. Don't need to improve on something that already was done so well, right?
Just be making
well,
it up.
Thank you all for your time, for your vulnerability and honesty, and your work as researchers. So can we give a hand to our panel? And these are 6 brilliant folks, and just know that we could probably have had 600 people with all different perspectives, research interests, and pathways for you to hear from. But hopefully this just gave you a little bit of a sense of some of what is possible down the road. And are you going to come up, or are we just going to a break? You're going to come up, okay.
All right, so I don't think it's on your schedule, but you probably noticed that there's a gap. So we will have a break from 3 to 3:20. But one thing I also want folks to kind of keep in mind, that many of the folks up here are sharing stories that probably sound a lot like your stories, or have elements of didn't know where I was going, not sure what I want to do next. It's not that direct. Like I run into students that think that people that are in areas of research, they know that when they're 12, and by the time they're 18, they've got their first publication done, and by the time they're 22, they're grant funded, and by the time they're 40, they're waiting for their Nobel Prize to arrive. Like, that's not how it works. It's very circular and looping, and it's not a straight linear path. And I think a lot of the folks here were kind of able to put some meaning into that and kind of show you and illustrate how that happens. So that means we've got about a 20-minute break. Feel free to move around, stretch your legs. Bathroom, there's water. I think there might still be some coffee around. Try not to attack our panelists. If they have time to chat with you and they look like they're ready to chat, feel free, but you know, they may have things to do. They're busy researchers.
Sorry, I'm waiting for my Nobel Prize.
I'm going to Pilates.
Oh, there you go. That's the right